Selassie is a chef based in Accra, which is in Ghana, and we love her approach towards food because it's not just one-dimensional, and that fits really well to what we do, but Selassie looks at all the different perspectives, including community, the economy, the environmental issues around it. And she has also a very interdisciplinary background. So she holds a master's degree in international affairs, has a bachelor's degree in geography and environmental studies, and worked more than a decade with the UN in humanitarian and did humanitarian work. And since 2014, she has a project called Midunu, which does nomadic events, private dining, and also chocolate making. And there she's using underutilized ingredients, which are local and seasonal, and is also looking at traditional techniques, how to preserve these, and is also very plant-based. And I don't want to say too much. I would like to give Selassie now the stage that we have now, and I'm very excited to hear you because I met you at a conference last year and I was super, super inspired of how you approach your work, and so I'm very happy that you're here and you're taking your time, and I'm very happy to listen to you again.
Thank you. You can all hear me? Yep, okay. Thank you for joining and thank you for the invitation. I'm hoping just to get everybody participating and just to get to know and hear a little bit from you. I wanted to just start off by asking everybody to think about sort of some of their favorite meals, something that brings you home, something that reminds you of a safe place, or just a favorite food or a favorite dish. So if you could just actually use your chat box. If I said a German dish, what are some of your favorite German dishes? Okay, I will try, I can't pronounce, so I'm just, okay, so we have potato soup. Anybody else? Any other favorite German dishes? Apricot dumplings? Potatoes? Great, lots of stuff coming in now. Blood sausage? Wonderful. So I'm seeing a lot of beautiful dishes that I wish I was actually able to come and visit you guys and taste them. And then if I said maybe, let's go to South America. If we said Mexico, what are some of maybe your favorite Mexican dishes or dishes from South America? So dishes from South America, we have guacamole. So I see the avocados there. Any other dishes from Southern South America? Tortillas? Wonderful. So I'm thinking of fresh pico de gallo. I'm thinking of, okay, quesadillas, horchata, fantastic. Then if we move to Asia, any favorite dishes from Asia? Okay, pho, kimchi, biryani, wonderful, lots of stuff coming in. All right, so now we're gonna move to Africa. So what are some of your favorite dishes from the African continent? Or if any of you have experience in Ghana, maybe any Ghanaian dishes that you love? Bunny chow from South Africa, fufu. Ethiopian pancakes, great. So normally when I get to that part, we don't really have a lot of information coming out, and a lot of people haven't had the chance to experience it. And so for me, that was actually how I kind of accidentally became a chef, I guess. So I was born in Ghana. My family moved to the US, and one of the ways we held on to our cultural heritage was through food. So we were always eating Ghanaian dishes at home, and I think we ate out twice a year when I was growing up, and it was for Mother's Day and my mother's birthday. Those are the times that we would eat out. And so as I started my professional life and I was working with the UN, I kept meeting people who didn't understand African food, and I just was shocked and surprised because I was so in love with it, and it was such a big part of everything that I knew. Beautiful flavors, the amazing fruits, the amazing vegetables, the dishes, and the soups and the stews. So after a while, I just kind of got a little bit upset that people didn't understand it or didn't know it, or actually would think of famine every time they would think about food in Africa. So I decided to go into culinary school and learned the basics and came back and I started Midunu in Ghana. And one of the things I realized was as I was moving around from place to place, I had traveled through a lot of different countries. I went to Central African Republic, and I fell in love with something made out of the seeds from a pumpkin. Igusi is what we call it in West Africa. Côte d'Ivoire, I was eating a lot of acheke, which is made from cassava. In Ethiopia, we had fantastic access to injera, which someone has mentioned in the chat box. Ghana, I love kelewele, anything with plantains. I went to Liberia, I saw the most amazing stews made out of sweet potato leaves. Sweet potato greens is what they call them. In Nigeria, I was getting to have all these fantastic dishes, but I wanted to share them with the rest of the world. And as I was traveling, I also started seeing some sort of foodways and food systems that were set up. When I would go from one part of the continent to the other, so from West Africa to East Africa, you would see the differences. If I went from Southern Africa, Southern Ghana to the northern part of Ghana, on the coast is where I am, but if you went up north, the vegetation completely changes. So my background in geography really helped me to sort of see how geography plays a role. And I could really see that where you are is what grows there, and that's the beginning of your cuisine. I started noticing traditional practices and that actually allowed us to create and preserve our food. So in Ghana, on Tuesdays are taboo days for fishing. So it's a traditional way of protecting the ocean, and on Tuesdays, no fishermen go fishing. And in Senegal, it happens during the October-November months because that's the time when the fish spawn. So they go from Guinea-Bissau to Mauritania, and so they allow the waterways to be a breeding ground for these fish. You get to see sort of ceremonial rites and lifestyle preferences. So even though most sub-Saharan Africans are lactose intolerant, you see populations that are nomadic, that move with their cattle. They have actually adapted to be able to drink milk and process milk, very much like you would see in Northern Europe. And this is actually an interesting link because it has to do with vitamin D and access to the sun, which is why most sub-Saharan Africans don't need to process dairy because we're getting a lot of our vitamin D from the sun. You get to also see religious practices and what that does for food. If you go to Ethiopia, you'll see that there are all these fasting days because of Orthodox Catholics. And so they have so many feasting days that they have an amazing vegetarian cuisine that's beautiful and flavorful and similar to what you would see in parts of India. Preservation techniques. We live in a danger zone. What I mean by danger zone is for all of you chefs, you know that there's, we can't keep food at a certain temperature for a long time. And this actually is where I live. And talking to a lot of grandmothers and finding out about salting, drying, smoking, and fermenting as ways that we were in Ghana, finding ways to allow our fish, our grains to last longer by putting them through these fermentation and preservation techniques. And then looking at sustainability. There are lots of interesting habits. So for example, in West Africa, we now eat a lot of rice, but traditionally we did not eat a lot of rice. And it's because of the labor and the efforts that go into rice cultivation and the lack of water. And so rice was something that we ate only for special occasions. But now it's become something that is almost a daily. And it's turned into that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. So I learned a lot of amazing lessons while I was traveling around, and one of them was that Africa actually till today remains one of the most plant-forward continents in the world. So a lot of our proteins come from nuts and seeds and beans and lentils, and even this is actually a photo of a groundnut soup. So it's peanut soup, and so we get the proteins from there. So you actually don't need to add any additional animal protein to this dish, but it's a very normal way for us to be eating. So that's one of the lessons that I learned while I was traveling around and sort of eating my way and working my way through Africa. Another lesson that I learned was about no waste and low waste. So a lot of what we see, and I think maybe I will say that a lot of these lessons are not unique to Africa, but they're lessons that you still see on a day-to-day basis in the continent. I think a lot of these are lessons that you will the most traditional cuisine. So, if we look at in Germany, there's ways that we make sure that we use the entire animal or the entire vegetable or the entire fruit. Food is very communal, and as you move away from the communities and the rural areas and the towns, and you move into urban areas, we lose a lot of this no waste sort of philosophy of trying to use all the different parts of the fruits, vegetables, and plants and animals. What you see here is actually an image of a dish. We call it wache in Ghana. It's a rice and beans dish. And in the middle is a preserved chili sauce. So we take green chilies, onions. It's almost like a sambal. We cook it down, and then it's preserved so it can keep over time. And what you see in the upper right corner is something called wele. Wele is actually the skin of the cow, and it's actually a delicacy for us. If I had time, I will tell you more, but maybe during the question and answer, I'll tell you more about it, because it actually messed up someone's business plan who was coming to West Africa to do a shoe factory using leather from West Africa, and then he realized that we actually make sure that it's not wasted. Another topic and lesson that I learned was that we have a lot of bold flavors, and so we don't have a big dairy industry, because a lot of the zones actually have a disease that's not good for cattle. So it's not the same type of environment that you would find in Europe. But you will see that a lot of our food traditionally does not have a lot of fat, but there's a lot of bold flavors, and a lot of it comes from the preservation techniques that are used. So this is actually salted tuna that you see in the front, and then there's a piece of tilapia fish in the back, but we use salt to preserve these, and these go into the flavor components of our food. So whereas classically in French cuisine, you'll see a lot of creams and butter, in Ghana specifically, in West Africa, you'll see a lot more of these preserved items bringing in a lot of flavors into the cuisine. Another lesson is wild and foraged, and I think there's been a major resurgence of wild and foraged foods all over the world. And this is boma, and this is it's a nightshade. It comes from the eggplant family. It's the leaves. And in lots of parts of actually, I think South America as well as Africa, we use it as one of the greens in our diet in many parts. And it's not something that is planted. It's something that is foraged and eaten wild. And another element, one of my favorites, is communal dining, and this is injera, which is the Ethiopian pancake someone mentioned in there. It's made from teff, one of the ancient grains. It's fermented, almost similar to, it is actually a sourdough type of fermentation, and then it's almost laid out like you would a crepe, and it's used as a base. And in Ethiopia, there's a major culture of sharing food. So the injera would be placed on a plate, on a basket, and all the sauces would be placed on top of it, and everyone eats together. I love the concept, and I grew up with it, and I just continue to love it. Eating together teaches people to share. It teaches you how to be hospitable to other people. It also shows you the importance of managing how you eat. I think when you see certain eating, when you eat alone, I think you eat differently than when you are with company and when you're sharing a plate with company. And so I think it teaches you a lot of lessons about sharing and community. In Senegal, they have chabuchen, which is a rice dish, and it's something that if you have a visitor, there are certain things you would prepare if you know you're having a visitor in the house. For example, shrimp is used and fish balls are used to place in the dish. When I first moved to Senegal, and I was living there for 6 years, but when I first got there, there was a family that had invited me over for dinner or for lunch, because it's quite a heavy meal. I didn't realize it, but as we were chatting, I was eating, but I kept having food in front of me. And it turns out everyone traditionally would take their favorite part and give it to the visitor. So as I was eating, everybody was giving me their favorite parts of the dish to sort of welcome me to the family and welcome me to the meal. So it stuck with me. And Midunu is actually an Erbe word, which means I feel that one of the elements that I hold on to very dearly, particularly about the way we eat in Ghana, is that we usually never eat alone. Food is something that is shared. Even if, it's a small portion of something, if there's someone around, you always offer and share what you have. And so that's a lot of the beauty that I find within communal dining. I talked about teff. There are a lot of ancient grains around the continent. So when we're talking about adding biodiversity, eating beyond sort of the corn and rice, there's millet, there's sorghum, there's teff, there's fonio. And actually, interestingly enough, all of these are gluten-free. So when it comes to sort of some of the dietary challenges we're having in the modern world, these are very amazing answers. The other thing that's interesting about a lot of them is because they're climate tolerant. So a lot of these do well without a lot of water. They do well without heavy or need for fertilization of soil. So even in slightly more arid soil, they do well. So when it comes to climate change, these are some of the grains that we may want to start thinking more and more about and how to integrate them into our diet. So that's what I learned as I traveled around the continent. And then I moved back to Ghana in 2014. And I expected to see exactly what we had talked about. I expected to see preservation techniques. I expected to see sustainability. I expected to see cultural and traditional practices. But what I started seeing were farmers and people talking about climate change, talking about lifestyle changes, families where recipes and techniques were not being passed down within generations. I was finding that people were actually moving around a lot. So people were eating on the run, and so we're not eating at home. And I got to see there was a lot of other cuisines in Ghana. And when you go out, you actually see things that are not that traditional anymore. And I was also starting to see that families just didn't have the time, and urban life had sort of caught up with everybody. So one of the things that I believe is that there's so many different forces within the continent deciding what we're eating that we're actually losing a lot of our culture. When you ask the question, who's deciding what we eat in Ghana, I actually don't know the answer to that. I don't believe that there's a strong policy framework that's deciding for us, but we've got, for example, things that are coming from Europe that need to be dumped because, for example, the meat has spent too long in a freezer somewhere and it needs to be sent off somewhere, and a lot of that somewhere ends up being Africa. And what happens is, for example, the chicken that comes in frozen because it needs to leave the European Union, it's no longer part of the, it's no longer of good quality, comes here, and because of the pricing, it's actually squeezing out the local poultry farmers. So you will find, and there was actually a documentary done by DW, and when you find out that the local poultry farmer is competing with these sort of sub-quality or substandard quality, there's nothing that can be done, but people are going to go for the price option rather than maybe what's better for our economy locally. And so those are some of the things that you will see. I think I've lost count now, but we've got, I think, 5 Burger Kings and more than 10 KFCs in Accra alone. So you'll just see how that's changing. But the interesting thing also about fast food in our context is it's actually a sign of privilege. So it's something, in the Western world, fast food is kind of not necessarily seen as something that you do with prestige, but here it's actually 20% more expensive because of the transportation and logistics costs. This figure is a little bit old. It's from 2017, but the estimate at the time was that by 2025, we would increase our importation into the entire African continent from 35 billion to 110 billion. And the thing that's interesting about the 110 billion is that's the exact same amount we need for us to solve our electricity problems in the continent. So food is big business. Food has a huge impact. In Ghana at the moment, it's estimated that 16 to 18% of what's in the grocery store is actually local. So when you think about growing an economy, feeding your own people, being resilient, being independent, these are some of the challenges that are faced. So when I came back, I really started trying to work and to figure out some of these things. I realized that though my family had left when I was young, a lot had changed, and a lot of what the younger generation knew, things that I ate actually didn't exist anymore in Accra. So that became something that I became aware of and worked really hard to try to find ways to preserve. So I think as we will see over the next couple of weeks, is food touches everything, whether it's the trade issue that I mentioned earlier with chicken, whether it's about the environmental impact. I went to the northern part of the country and got to see the crops they were growing was being heavily influenced by agricultural policy of fertilizers, seed companies coming into Ghana, even though the farmers know that their soil is not as healthy as it used to be. You can see diabetes going up, so we can see the link between food and health and nutrition. When it comes to culture and arts, as I mentioned from my personal story, food was a major part of my culture. But I'm starting to see biodiversity issues and the policy issues. And I think these are all the issues that you were speaking about and you continue to speak about in community. And I think this is the importance of having so many people to the table, because all of us have a different part that we understand. And together, from the different points, we can start to actually make an impact. So I try to work from my perspective as a chef, to see how to take some of these ingredients and make delicious food and beautiful food that allow us to increase the value of these ingredients. So this is a dish that's using plantain and peanuts. And so it's really, for me, the challenge is how do you create deliciousness that makes sense for what grows where you are, and what allows for sustainability. So this is a dessert that comes and is inspired by Ethiopia, where their palate and their flavors, a lot of different ingredients, but all of these are inspired by actually a glass of juice I had in Lalibela. This is, again, using pasta as my inspiration, but I've used egusi, which is a melon seed. I've used amaranth leaves, which are traditionally eaten here, as the base of my dish. I've used no cream, and so I've used the cashews as my sauce. I think that as we start to communicate and share, there's a lot of things that we may or may not realize. These are the spices that I use. This is my pantry. This is my sort of my secret sauce. And interestingly enough, I think most people have not seen or heard of a lot of these spices, and some of them don't even have English names. So there's so much out there that we don't even know, and we haven't been able to share with each other yet. So I try to share them through my chocolate. So I kind of figure most people like chocolate, and most people don't have familiarity with some of these spices and flavors, and bringing the two things together, something somebody knows and something somebody does not know, allows a space for conversation and communication. But I really think that it's important for us to go beyond the work that I'm doing in Ghana, and I think the lessons that I've learned within the continent have a broader need to be shared, because over the last few years, the more I speak with people, the more I realize all of our challenges are the same. I'm sure as the weeks go on and the conversations we're going to have after this, the problems and the challenges you're having in Germany and in other parts of the world will probably be very similar to the challenges I'm having with the food system and the foodways that we're having in Ghana. And I think for me, what I want you to take away from this conversation is how do you use some of these lessons from the African kitchen in the work that you're doing locally. So in terms of the traditional preservation techniques and using that to bring flavor, in terms of wild and foraged, in terms of no waste. What are some of the traditional ways that communities in Germany were making sure all the different parts of the vegetable or the fruit were being used, or the animals were being used. I think trying to bring those back into the conversation. Someone mentioned blood sausage earlier, and that's a fantastic way of making sure we're not wasting anything. I want us to also, I would love for you to also have an understanding of the food choices that you're making in Germany and the policies that are happening in Germany and in the European Union, and how they actually have an impact everywhere else in the world. Whether we're talking about cocoa and chocolate and the fact that there's a lot of structural injustice built into the cocoa industry, and there needs to be a push to support more value added in countries in the South, because taking away the possibility of adding value is inherently causing a lot of systemic issues. It could be in dumping policies. It could be also in choosing what you're eating. Yes, eat local, but also be curious. Also share stories. Also try new spices. Support local producers. Support chefs that are bringing in flavors from other parts of the world, because that also can help to stimulate an economy. So I think these are some of the three key messages that I think I would love for us to discuss further from every single person's professional perspective. How can we move forward and create better impact through our choices, but also sharing stories and sharing the stage. How do we get to know more about other food systems and the impact that we're making there? How do we share and start to create synergies amongst ourselves? So I wanted to leave you with, this is actually an image. There's a friend of mine who's a cartoonist, and whenever he and I sit around and have a long conversation, me boring him about food, it ends up turning into a piece of art. And this one is around the issue of jollof. So some of you may or may not have heard about jollof, but it's a rice dish that is very popular in West Africa. And these days, because of convenience, rice has come into our plate very much so. And this dish is one that is, I guess the closest thing is maybe like a paella or a jambalaya. And actually, this is the original of where jambalaya came from. But it's a rice and tomato dish. But when you get it in Ghana, the rice is coming from Asia. The chicken is coming from Brazil. Depending on the time of year, the tomatoes and onions are coming from the Netherlands. And so you've got salad cream coming in from the UK with Heinz. And then you've got a little bit of the local cabbage and chilies in the dish. So that's actually what he's drawn with the flags to sort of talk about. How do you have a national dish that actually fundamentally does not support your local economy? And what does that mean? The first chef that you'll see in the picture in the front is actually the president of Ghana. And the other two quote-unquote chefs in the image are the president of Nigeria and the president of Senegal, because there's this ongoing conversation about who makes the better jollof. And so he kind of is, tongue-in-cheek. They're fighting over this dish, but fundamentally China is very much in the picture and is doing a lot within the African continent. We're having a conversation about this dish that's not even supporting our economies. And then he threw in Trump, because that was around the time that he was talking about African countries, and I will watch my language, but there's the black chili sauce that I showed you in the image earlier. We call it shito. And so there was a conversation, I think about a year or so ago, when Trump was being very derogatory towards African countries, but this sauce is called shito, so he threw that in there just for fun. Lastly, I wanted to leave you with this image, and it is part of the Adinkra symbols in Ghana, and they're very old, and each symbol highlights something in society that is a key concept. And this particular one is called Sankofa, and it means go back and get it. And if I had been able to show you the full image, the feet of the chicken are facing forward, the head is going back, and what is in the beak is a golden egg. So it's about the importance of understanding your history and your past, taking those lessons and being able to use those to move forward. So that's what I wanted to end with. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Selassie. Can you hear me all?
I can, yes.
Thanks so much for talking and sharing what you're doing and your knowledge. Yeah, as you said, I think there's so many synergies, and I think there's so many topics that you talked about in the last 20 minutes that we can go deeper into and discuss. So I'm going to hand over to Carla now, who's going to lead the Q&A for us. So if you have a question, there's already 2 that were asked in the chat. But if you have a question, please use the raising hand option in the menu, and Carla will ask you to speak.
Do you want me to start with the 2 questions?
Sure. Why don't you say what the spices are in the meantime while we're setting it up?
Sure. All right. So the spices that we have here, we've got a lot of them are very West African. So the large sort of pod is, I'm not sure if there's an official English name for it, but in Ghana we call it prekese. It's a pod that comes from a tree. And in Nigeria, they call it Aden. And so I've heard Aden fruit used for it, but there's a very long Latin name for it. Going clockwise, the small sort of seeds are at about 1, 2 o'clock on the clock. Grain of paradise, and that you can get from a couple other countries, but it's definitely not a widespread ingredient. The spices that are at about 5 o'clock, the English name for that is Salim pepper. Then going to about 6, 7 o'clock, you will see something that looks like a black pepper. It's in the same family as the black pepper, but it has a little tail on it, and I believe the English name is kubeb. And then the last one that you see at about 9 o'clock, that is a couple different names for it. Some people call it calabash nutmeg. I call it, it's in the nutmeg family, and you find it in West Africa. So those are the spices.
Thank you. So if anyone has questions, you can just raise your hand and I will give you the opportunity to speak. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you can type your question in the chat. And we actually got 2 more questions. Maybe I can read them. So there's an ongoing debate also. Okay. One question by Anna was, how can we as white Germans use African techniques in cooking, share African culture and the way they cook without being racist by doing cultural appropriation? If you want to talk a bit about that.
I mean, yeah, I think for me that was one of the reasons I put the sharing the stage and sharing stories. I think it's important to not take things out of context. I think it's important to, well, as much as possible, I think it's depending on the way you're using it. I think if you have someone who is from that culture, to have them talk about it, share it, and express it. I think other than that, I think it's important to make sure we share the stories and the stage. The stage is where we are. One of the things that I would say, for example, that does frustrate me personally, is that sometimes we're not willing to, and this is maybe a question like, how open are we to trying other people's food or other people's ingredients and techniques unless somebody that looks like us is doing it? And that's where the challenge, I think, for me is that, you know, in many ways they're gatekeepers, and it's like, if they haven't said it's good, we won't try it. So I think 2 things. Number 1, support the communities and the cultural cuisines where these things come from. I think that's a very important way to respect that. And then the second one is to find ways to collaborate possibly and allow people to share their stories and to give a voice to the cuisine and the technique. I know the last few years or months, actually, there have been conversations about people not wanting to give credit to where food comes from. I am trying to see if I can remember the exact one. It was recently something around the New York Times, where someone refused to call something which was fundamentally a curry. And I think it's really important to say it's inspired by, it comes from, the technique is, this is how it was used. And also, as much as possible, if you're using ingredients, try to get ingredients that support that community, and to make sure that value is moving. I think the issue is always when value stops. So I think those are important things to think about as you're finding the right way to share and engage with some of these techniques and ingredients.
Yes, I think the journalist or the writer you were talking about is Alison Roman, and there was a debate on her developing a recipe for a stew, which was essentially a curry. So I think that was what you were mentioning. And also Frida has a comment on that.
Yes, I just wanted to mention that we also will have, I think, 1 or 2 program points on cultural appropriation. So if anyone is interested, either we can tell you again or check out the program for those topics if you guys want to go more into detail in that.
Okay, we have some more questions in the chat. So next one is, I read about the influx of Hindu migration to Ghana after Indian independence in 1947. Has there been a cultural shift in the Ghanaian cuisine since then?
It would be hard for me to say exactly, but Ghana has a lot of different influences. So we have a Lebanese community, we have an Indian community, so there are different influences coming into the food. I have to look into it. I haven't looked into it that deeply myself specifically, but you do see influences, not so much in traditional Ghanaian cuisine, but that food is available that is not Ghanaian, that comes from these communities. I don't know if that answers the question.
Maybe the person who, feel free to just
I'm kind of going through the question, so let's see.
Okay.
There's a lot of, I think we are working together as much as possible, but the forces are many. I think, when you think about, if we just say the influences on German cuisine and the foodways that this community is supporting, it's not as, how should I say, the forces in Ghana are not just internal. And when we say global, it's not sort of like a global shift, but it's like literally people throwing things into your economy to shift and change them. So we are working together to save the cuisine. I think that we also have something called the Ghana Food Movement, which is a collaboration of different chefs and people in the food system, not just only chefs, working to see how best to do it so that we can bring together our energy to create something bigger than each and every single one of us. In terms of women, my kitchen has always been 100% women. So the photo that I showed is actually of me in my kitchen. I wanted to find ways to, globally, and even in Ghana, when you meet somebody, you'll see the Ghanaian men will call themselves chefs, and Ghanaian women almost never call themselves chefs. So when I started, I really wanted to make a conscious effort to empower young women who wanted to go into the industry to feel able to and capable of doing that. And it's been great. It's been wonderful to be able to do that and make it known and clear that women's role in terms of food should not be solely for domestic. It can be for professional. And it can be professional at a high level as well. So that's been something that I've been doing, and it's been really fun. Let's see. In terms of how
do you want to ask your question directly so we don't have to read, but it's a little bit more personal? Carla can unmute you. Okay, Patrick, you're unmuted. Can you ask your question? Patrick? Nope, okay, then we will read it.
Okay,
so what kind of resources did you use to dig into your original lost local recipes, and how far did you go back? Because some ingredients are imported back in the days and are now called local.
Yeah, I don't have, and I'm still working on improving my methodology. I just use the resources I have available, talking to as many aunties, grandparents, and people and farmers in the village, for example, and just hearing from them. So I know that what I can research is very limited because we don't have a lot of written history. So it's really about talking to as many people from older generations as possible. I've done a little bit of research going to some universities, oddly enough, outside of Ghana, because they have writings about their experiences in Ghana. So I've used books as some parts of it. In terms of ingredients, for sure, there's a lot that is not local that we call local. One of the ones that I've been looking at is corn. There's a traditional dish called kenke, and kenke is made from fermented cornmeal. And corn is not indigenous to Ghana at all. And tomatoes are also not indigenous to Ghana at all. But they came in at a certain point and have made their home. And people, like, there's so many dishes that have a tomato base to them that the question that I keep asking is, what were we doing before the tomatoes came? So it's and the same thing with the corn, you know. And so that corn dish, I've actually done it using plantain and fermenting the plantain to try to see what I can do, you know, and what might have been, you know, I don't know. But also I do it from a point of what should be, because the impact that corn has on the soil is quite difficult, and especially in Ghana, there's a lot of there's a lot of fertilizer to support the soil to be able to push and grow this corn. So plantain is actually one of the tropical staple trees, which does not need to be, you know, cut down and does not need to be replanted. So it has a better footprint in terms of environment than corn. So I've started switching and playing with that, using breadfruit, using jackfruit for that dish.
I would like to ask you also a little bit to talk a little bit more about the ancient grains, because I know also that Jonna is here in this group, and Jonna is going to start a corn lab here in Berlin and in Germany, and we're looking at this topic anyways as well, because it's so diverse and so interesting, and you're already using so many ancient grains in your cuisine. Maybe you can give some examples and why it's so important to you.
Well, for me, if everybody's going left, I'm always going right. So I came and I saw that everything was really rice heavy. And when I was growing up in Ghana, we didn't eat that much rice. And so I was kind of shocked. And so when I started looking at I think it was like, I don't remember exactly how many, it was $1.6 billion was spent on the importation of rice from Asia in 2017, I believe. And so I was like, what can we do with what is here that would cut back on the imports and would put more money in Ghana? So I looked at millet and sorghum, and those were also things that would do well with climate change. So that's where I've been spending a lot of energy. My kind of baby is millet. Millet is, though we have a lot of it traditionally, it's not used a lot. So I started asking why. It turns out that millet is, we thrash it, like when we're harvesting it, it's thrashed on the ground. So by the time they collect it, it picks up a lot of stones. And so people weren't using it because of that. But people in urban areas like in Accra, there's only 2 recipes people know on how to use millet. So this goes back to the role of a chef or cooks, and how can we create more recipes? How can we create more buyers and uptakers to be now able to tell a farmer, please get this equipment. Yes, it's expensive, but people will buy your improved millet at a higher price. So it's like, how do we start this conversation around supply and demand? So millet is one of my favorites. Beer is made from A lot of traditional beers are like made from sorghum, so sorghum does a little bit better in terms of popularity, but it's still underutilized. And then right now, maybe you're getting fonio in Germany, but I'm not sure. But fonio is an ancient grain that comes from the Sahelian area, so like the northern part of Ghana and Mali and Senegal. And it's also like a rice grain and also gluten-free. And it actually like cooks, you boil the water and put the grain in, and then when you let it cook for another 2-3 minutes, it's ready. So when you think about it, if you're cooking in a rural community, you're using a lot less fuel. Or if you don't have a lot of money and you're using gas, like you're using a lot less. You're not cooking, for hours and hours or for a long time. So those are some of the ones that I would highlight that we have a lot, particularly in West Africa.
Have you, in the things that you remember from your comfort foods from maybe also your childhood, have you realized that some ingredients don't actually exist anymore because of the climate change and because some things just don't simply grow anymore? Or any changes in the...
I haven't noticed that. I think that right now what you're getting is a reduction of ingredients. And then I would say there's also challenges in the food system. So for example, there's a mushroom called domo, and it's a mushroom that spontaneously comes, it grows spontaneously in certain environments. And you'll get it in rural areas, but it never makes its way to Accra. So I've seen it once, and it's like after 6 years I've been looking for this mushroom, and things do exist, but two challenges, I think. One is getting it to like our supply system. It's easier for us to get things from Europe than it is for us to get things from northern parts of the country in some cases. I would also say that because people are not aware of the level of interest, it's going down, and also because of land use. So there's some fruits, for example, that people used to have in their backyard, but because people are moving to apartments now, we're having a lot less trees, and then because it's not a cash crop that's being farmed to go outside of Ghana, there's a lack of interest in growing those for the local market.
Yeah, it's also, we also feel it here. It's also a two-way street. Sometimes farmers, when we talk to them, we're like, oh, we want this. It's so amazing. It tastes great. They're like, oh, you really want to have this? Like, no one cares about it. And we're like, no, it's really, really great. You should grow it. But they're not even aware that people actually want to eat it because maybe it's nothing important for them, or they don't think it's like fancy. And we for example, we serve right now like this cucumber that is that's cooked. And it's very, very old school, and it's not a fancy ingredient, right? So the older people, especially also in Germany, they don't understand why these ingredients that they used to eat are now wanted. So I think it's also about this communication.
Yeah.
How did you? There are some questions coming in. I have 1,000 questions for you, but let's. So Heike is also asking, and I also wanted to ask you about the chocolate, because there's also Christiane in here who's also making pralines with local ingredients here in Berlin. So there's some synergies already. But Heike is asking, it's wonderful that you're making chocolate. The coca in Ghana is great, but how is it to make chocolate in this climate? And are you serving the chocolate only in your restaurant?
Yeah. It's a challenge. We have, chocolate doesn't like heat and humidity. So, it is a challenge. For example, for a lot of sub-Saharan countries, you need to add a little bit of lecithin, for example, when you're making your chocolate, because it helps with the stabilizing it. It's definitely hard. And it's not even hard making it. It's actually, for me, it's about the delivery and getting it to customers, because they're not bars that are a bit more resilient. They're like bonbons. But I would say that they're currently only available in Ghana, but I'm actually I'm going to be launching them in the US in the fourth quarter. The weather definitely is a huge challenge, but the other challenges are actually the fact that there's a monopoly on sugar. The global, we have sugarcane, but we only just last 2 years ago refurbished a sugar factory. So you can see that you need to bring all the other ingredients together besides the cacao, which we have. So again, this goes back to the conversation about how do we make sure that the remnant of colonialism and the idea that we're only extracting and we're not adding value in certain countries is looked at and reviewed, and that we're able to support and make real systemic change. So it's really, it's great to buy fair trade and have a good price for the farmers in Ghana, but it's also important for them to live in an environment where there are schools and hospitals that function, which means that there needs to be more added value at the country level. There was a question, Patrick, I think came back with a follow-up question. So for me, what I would, maybe just to clarify, when I say some of these things have disappeared, they've disappeared from our plates. They have not disappeared from the soil. So when you're in an urban area, then I said there's the value, the transportation systems and the logistics, and also the feeling that you're now in a urban area and you have reached a certain level in life, and so you eat something else, are some of the challenges that we're having in these dishes. There's a psychological component as well. There's a certain level of aspiration of being able to eat imported food. My mother, we had this conversation, she grew up in Tamale in northern part of Ghana, and she now lives in New York, and so we were laughing that she grew up eating millet and brown rice, and then when she moved to Accra and went to university and she had money and stuff, then she ate white rice, and now she lives in New York and she's buying millet and brown rice from Whole Foods, so there's this psychological feeling that, oh, I've made it, so I need to buy that other thing, and so it's not that they don't exist and they're not growing, Patrick. So I wanted to clarify that.
Richard is asking, is the knowledge about these little gems preserved? Is the knowledge about these little gems preserved, though, or is there also loss of local knowledge due to the rise of imported food culture?
Okay, so I think there's a couple different reasons how things are getting lost. So one is there's a psychological component of aspiration. Like if you go to a KFC in Accra on a Sunday, you'll see families, this is before COVID, you'll see families, coming from church in their Sunday best because they actually have, they have the money to go to KFC. It's considered fancy. It's considered something that we didn't have before. Part of it is because of logistics chains, because it's easier for a restaurant to go and buy the imported ingredient than figuring out how to get it from location A to location B. Part of it is government policy, or should I say other governments' policy and trade, because of kickbacks and because of prices being so low that they can flood the market. Part of it is because the children are going to boarding school and are not spending as much time at home, so they're not eating some of the dishes that they're not cooking or able to cook dishes that their mother was making, or their mother didn't have time to teach them, or their father didn't have time to teach them. Some of it is because you live in an apartment now, and some of the traditional cooking techniques can, so one of my collaborators is an architect, and one of the things we realized is when we had the modern kitchens brought to Ghana, you've now imported a stove and equipment that was built for European cuisine and American cuisine that's been dumped in our market. We're the last off-taker. No one customized and changed the design of any of it for us. So we're stuck with whatever they throw at us. And so we realized that you have this fancy modern kitchen that you could show to your friends, and it's a show kitchen. And then when you needed to cook the fufu and other dishes, you did it outside, or what we call the African kitchen. So in many houses now, you have a show kitchen that's beautiful, and then when you need to do the hard cooking or like the traditional cooking, you cook it outside. And then also the time. Some of these dishes take more time. We don't have a big agro-processing industry that's attuned to these ingredients. So no one is saying, hey, how do we cook this faster, or how do we make this easier to process in a modern kitchen? So we don't have the semi-processed ingredients in such a way that you can cook the food quickly. So when you're on your way home at 5 p.m., going to be stuck in traffic for an hour and have to cook a meal for your family at 5, you're going to cook rice because it'll be ready in 30 minutes. You're not going to make fufu because you have to go outside, you have to boil this, and so there are all these different challenges that come into how it's getting lost. It's convenience, it's pricing, it's the local chicken is twice as expensive. I always say, what if you ate more beans and then had the local chicken less often? You could still make it work. But there's this idea that I have money and I can buy chicken, or I should be able to eat more meat because it's a sign of prestige. I mean, it happens in all cultures, right? So we're struggling with that now.
What do like the neighbors and like the communities around the restaurant, what do they think of you elevating the traditional cuisine that they know?
It's a mixed bag. I mean, I would say even my team, like when they first arrive, and it's like their first couple of months, like they think I'm a little crazy. And I love just asking people, which is your hometown and your home area? What are the ingredients from there? What are some dishes that you grew up with that you don't see anymore? Can you go to Auntie so-and-so, ask her to teach you how to make it on Monday, and then Tuesday come and show us how to make it? So I think it goes from being like, this lady's a little crazy, to actually my favorite dish is such and such, and I don't know how to make it, and my grandmother isn't alive anymore. She used to make it for me, but I have this aunt who knows how to do it, so let me learn it from her. So I think it's helped them to value it. I think my team also has become more proud to be able to showcase our food, because I think there's a certain place where you sometimes are taught to feel ashamed. Like when I was growing up in New York, every time my mom would have friends over for dinner, I remember one day my brother just said to my mom, like, why is it whenever we have people over, you never make like Ghanaian food? And my mom was like, well, because I don't know if they're going to be comfortable with it, and I don't know if they're going to be okay if we eat with our hands. And, so like it was just something that even she felt uncomfortable with. And I think it takes a little while to kind of want to be proud and share it and feel that you're in a space where someone's ready to have an open opinion about it and to be curious about it. So I think those are some of the feedback. But I think it's interesting when I do something, sometimes people don't believe it is what it is because of what it looks like. And then they taste it and they're like, oh, actually it is the same. But, and other times it's going to be like, well, I would never have used this ingredient in that way.
Oh, I have a direct follow-up question on this whole value and validation, because I'm interested in how young people perceive, or how are young people also interested in becoming chefs? Is there also this like wave of young people becoming more interested in cooking, and are they, like you say, like it's not the most common thing to cook traditional food, but do you feel like that's changing, or is that a wish that you have that's changing? And what is your wish generally from the younger generation?
I think it's definitely changing. So when I started, I was doing the first pop-up in Ghana, and now there are a lot of other sort of young chefs that have gotten into that space and are doing pop-ups. One of the challenges that we have is that in Ghana, in Accra, when it comes to rent and real estate, rent is quite expensive in Accra, and rent is in the right type of neighborhood, right? Actually, no, all across the board, rent, you have to pay a year in advance, and most likely 2 years in advance. So if you're starting a business and putting down a year or two for rent before you buy your equipment and everything else, it's a very expensive enterprise. So I think that the pop-up model that I was using became really interesting for a lot of young chefs, which has been good. And I think my wish is that, and when I first came back, a lot of young chefs were sort of like, I'm like, what's your favorite dish? And they're like, spaghetti bolognese. And I'm like, oh, okay. So like when I have my interviews, like, and I'm like, give me your signature dish. And, they were not Ghanaian. I was like, okay, but why not? So I think my wish is that people, young chefs, become proud and start to become curious about our cuisines and want to dig deeper and create from their own voice. So, you know, the curiosity of what can we do with these ingredients? And one of the things is I see young chefs sort of taking it and saying, I'm taking the traditional dish and just presenting it in a new way. And I want us to get to a place where the more we can come up with ways of using these ingredients, the more value we've added. And I want us to go in that direction and add value beyond what is present today.
I think I want to be really mindful with your time, and I think that's actually a nice last answer from you. Just one more thing that Christiane added to the chat, the girl who's also doing the policy here, she said, of course, the coca I use here is not from here. I would love to get in your contact and talk about the field more, even get in touch with your coca farmers. Okay. So I will definitely put you in touch. Otherwise, of course, you can follow her on social media at Atadika, Midunu or Midunu Chocolates. And the next talk is actually already tomorrow at 5 p.m. Same space, which is a digital space. It's from Kantine Zukunft, a project here in Berlin, actually, that's changing public kitchens right now. So very important work that they're doing. And the first talk is about urban food policy and actually how much change can happen from urban environments. This talk is in German, and yeah, I hope to all see you again soon in one of the next talks. Thank you so much for taking the time, Selassie, and I hope I will see you again soon in person. And yeah, thanks for sharing everything. And if you're interested, also please join the rest of the program. And I wish you a nice evening.
Thank you very much.
And everyone else too, thanks for joining.